Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the JBDC Virtual Biz Zone for Tuesday, April 12, 2022. My name is Sansia Campbell, and I'm from the Corporate Communications Unit, and it's a pleasure to have you with us this morning. As we always say, we know that there are many other places that you can be, and especially because we're open, you could have chosen to not join us virtually this morning. So we want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us this morning. Now, as you know, we've been focusing on, last week we did a session on cybersecurity, and this week we are moving into contracts. Now, we know that as small business owners, we enter different contracts on a daily basis, sometimes on a monthly basis, sometimes on a weekly basis. And some of us don't have the benefit of an attorney who can, skim through the contract for us and say to us, hey, this is a good idea, or this is not a good idea, or this needs a little work before you get into it. And so what we want to present to you this morning is a theme simply titled Contracts. Think before you ink. It's so very important for you to have those necessary tips. Those are the areas that you need to look at before you take that pen to paper. And so we have with us this morning an attorney at law. She is a very good friend of JBDC. I think we got acquainted somewhere about 5 to 6 years ago, and we've been acquainted ever since, simply because she's just one of the sweetest persons you could ever meet. Honestly, like really, really sweet girl. Lady, I'm sorry. So I'm going to introduce to you our speaker this morning. Her name is Ineka Brydson, and she's an attorney at law. And she's the inspiration and creator of IB Law Firm, birth in October 2017, subsequent to being enrolled as an attorney in Jamaica in December 2016. The practice areas of her firm include conveyancing, probate, estate and trust, and corporate and commercial law. Prior to starting her law firm, she was employed to JLand Title Limited, where she garnered valuable practical and professional experience. She also enjoys giving back to the community. She is a Christian who gives tremendous portions of her time and talent to her church community, and she also loves mentoring persons. Of course, she's a proud Bolmarian, and she cares, of course, about her physical health and wellness. She enjoys her life and is committed to serving God, herself, family, friends, and her community. Now, before I hand over to Ineka, just want to remind everyone that this morning's session, as with all others, it's being recorded. And so if you have a friend or a colleague who wanted to be here this morning, but is unable to be here for whatever reason, you can always look at our YouTube page at JBDC Jamaica, and you'll be able to access this and other presentations. Of course, feel free to talk with Ineka, drop your questions in the chat, interact with her. She's here to answer those pressing questions that you may have. So without further ado, it's over to you, Ineka, and thank you so much for agreeing to join us this morning.
Yes, you are welcome, and thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here. As you had said, I've been with the JBDC family for about 6 years now. It's been great. I'm not only being able to share my skills, but also every opportunity I get to be a part of any JBDC event, I always find myself learning as well. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity, for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to the discussion we'll have today. So the first thing I want to say is, yes, I'm here in my capacity as a professional. I'm an attorney at law, but I think it's also useful to know that I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a business owner. As Sansia said in the introduction, I operate a law firm. The name of it is IB Law Firm. So obviously the I and the B represent my name, Ineka Brydson. So I say that to say, I can relate in many ways to all the entrepreneurs on the platform, seeing that I not just have the experience and skills as a professional, but as a business owner. Some of the same challenges, pitfalls that you all face, not some, all of them. I myself, I have faced them. So I really do believe I'm in a very good position to impart some useful tips and advice to you, given the fact that I have the experience in both areas. So again, thank you. And let's get going. So contracts, think before you ink. I love that topic. Obviously, based on the topic, we'll be getting into some of the things you need to look out for when entering into any sort of contractual relationship. But before we even get into that, I have to say this. Before even talking about thinking before we ink, we need to have a contract. It sounds strange, but what I find interacting rather with a lot of entrepreneurs is that they're entering into transactions, into business relationships without even having a contract in place. It's actually very popular. And in my mind, I guess because of the legal background, immediately when a client or a prospective client comes to me with a situation where they find themselves in what we call a bad spot and there's no contract in place, immediately I'm just like, why? Why? Because I understand the value of the contract. So before we even talking about thinking before you ink, entrepreneurs, you need to have contracts in place. It doesn't matter what you're doing, a contract must be in place. A properly drafted contract must be in place. So now that we have the contract, in place, whether we downloaded one from the internet or we consulted with a professional, we have a contract in place. Let's get into what we need to look out for. So the obvious thing, it being in writing, and why I'm highlighting it being in writing is I find that, again, going back to not having a properly drafted contract, a lot of entrepreneurs, the terms of the arrangement are very informal. So the terms of the arrangement are exchanged via WhatsApp, they're exchanged via email. And while that can be used in certain circumstances, it does not offer the protection you need. So let me see if I can really drive it home to you. So as it relates to contracts, if any issue arises in relation to the terms of the arrangement, automatically what a lot of persons will do is to commence an action in the court. It's much more useful when there's a contract to present to the court for them to review, and considering the terms of the contract as well as the circumstances surrounding the issue, then they can make a determination. And of course, they'll apply laws, case law, legislation. When there is no document in place, your attorney or you will have to show the court that the terms of the email exchange and the WhatsApp exchange, it has to be presented in such a way to the court to show that a contract was in place. That is a lot of work. That is a lot of headache. So my humble advice is to ensure that we have a properly drafted contract in writing. Don't get comfortable with the fact that you exchange words via WhatsApp or email. And I should say, I'm sure we all can relate to the fact that sometimes some things get lost in translation, even just simple everyday communication. What I say, you interpret it, not how I meant it. So where I intended a full stop, you put an exclamation point. And that misunderstanding creates a problem in everyday life, much less a business relationship that has so many far-reaching implications. So again, you're going to hear me saying it a lot throughout this presentation. A properly drafted contract is essential. The obvious reason being, if there are any issues that arise, you want to ensure that you are protected. You want to ensure that the terms of the contract are structured in such a way that your interest is protected. But I have to add to that, it's not even just about the possibility of there being any issues. Honestly, it's just the prudent thing to do in business. Sometimes we just need to have a structure and a framework in place so that we're clear. So it's not always about, oh, you know, I may have to take it to court for my money. No, it's just really about clarity. It's just really about order. It's just really about being business minded, right? So having the contract in writing, properly drafted. I know some of us may rely on templates from the internet, I mean, the internet is such that you really can get a template for any and every contract. So I'm not saying that the templates online are not useful. What I am saying, however, is we have to be careful. So I can speak of my own personal situation with a client, a very good client of mine, entered into a construction contract, which is a very serious contract, and the contractor presented to her, or to them rather, a template that's obviously online. So the relationship progressed down an unfortunate path, so much so that we had to jump on the contract to really defend their rights. And just in me reviewing the contract, I mean, there are lots of flaws, a significant amount of flaws. Had the contract been reviewed, vetted by a professional, certainly those flaws would not be there. So I'm not telling you you cannot use templates from the internet. What I am saying is we have to use those templates with a lot of caution. I know also that as an entrepreneur, again, I'm telling you, I can relate, starting business. If you were like me, who started my business with a laptop and a dream, I call it, started the business with a laptop and a dream, you really don't have any capital. And that's just the reality. So it can be a challenge to say, engage the services of an attorney to review a contract for you. What I can say is, to be honest, reviewing a contract, it's not that expensive. And you can find attorneys who are reasonable in their fees when it comes down to vetting a contract, right? But either way, if as a very last resort, you absolutely cannot retain an attorney to vet the contract for you, whether to draft it or to vet it, I really do hope that coming out of this discussion, that you will have some sound guidance. Another thing I want to know before
before you move on, I think I want to interject a question here. You said that it should be at a reasonable, define reasonable. Because, yeah, I mean, you don't have to give us specifics, but maybe a range or some kind of idea as to how much you review a contract.
Or I can myself, right? Or so the contracts my clients have asked me to review. To be very honest with you, the legal fees have not surpassed $30,000.
Okay.
And that's really, so far, I believe that has been the maximum.
Okay.
Right? Or naturally, it will vary from attorney to attorney, but for me, the maximum thus far has been 30,000 Jamaican dollars.
So let me ask you, does it matter the type of contract, or would this be an across the board?
No, it matters the type. It matters the type, and also the amount of pages that will have to be reviewed. Another thing attorneys take into consideration is the means of the client, right? So a lot of attorneys, to be honest, take into consideration the means of the client. So whereas the fee would say be $10,000, but in all honesty, because you can tell a lot when you meet with a client for the first time, that initial consultation, can tell you a lot. So you can gauge to know, or even though my fees are 30,000, in these circumstances, I'll charge 10. Okay. So it varies. It varies. It really can be reasonable. In my.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So another thing I want to touch on before we get into the meat of the matter is ensuring the terms of the contract are legal. So a lot of times we may think that the fact that, there's a contract and it has these fancy clauses and there's a date and a signature, then that's it. No, absolutely not. Not because a contract was nicely typed on letter size paper, double spaced with a stamp. That in and of itself does not mean the terms of the contract are legal. And that in and of itself underscores the importance of having a professional vetting it. You will hear of situations where a contract is signed, duly executed, an issue arises, that issue is placed before the court, and when the court examines a particular clause or more than one clause, it is found that the clause is not legal. It goes against legislation. It goes against case law, right? So we have to be very careful. So in a situation like that, even though the contract is executed, the court has the power to deem the contract void, or what we call voidable. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of void versus voidable, but the crux of it, the crux of this particular point is that, you know, the terms of a contract are so important, so much so that if the contract is not properly drafted, you can find yourself in a situation where you feel secure by a particular term, and then when you find yourself in a situation where that particular term has to be examined, you find that the term is of no effect. So we have to be very, very careful. Clear? That's just the introduction. Any questions, concerns before we get into the nitty-gritty of the contract? Yes, no, maybe so. Everything crystal clear?
Crystal clear for now.
All right, good. All right, so I want us to have a discussion on what I like to call some common pitfalls in business contracts, right? Again, I have to speak from my own personal experience because, as I say to you, I'm an entrepreneur. And even with me starting also as attorneys, I'm going to try to be as practical as possible. As attorneys, the right thing to do is to commence the attorney-client relationship with an engagement letter, right? So the engagement letter is a contract. It's going to detail everything related to the particular transaction, including fees, right? You know, for people like me who, you know, you genuinely want to help people, you find yourself in a situation where you start working and the legal relationship is not properly defined, right? So, you know, they come to you and you want to help, man, you're ready to get going. So you just go based on the heart. And in some situations, you find yourself in a position where things progress in such a way where the client turns out to be not as nice as you probably thought. And I mean, sometimes it's more than that, but the point is things go down a road that was unexpected and you find yourself not protected. So whereas if the contract were in place, that's the engagement letter, you know, you would ensure you have a deposit and you make it clear that the deposit, we also call it retainer, you make it clear that it's non-refundable. You find yourself in a situation where because that is not in place, you're working and you're working hard. And if this client decides to start giving you trouble, you know, the work already done or almost done, and there is no money, no remuneration. So you have spent time, you have spent money on the job, but no payment. So I say that to say, don't be like me and other business owners who have been a bit too relaxed and probably operating more from the heart than with a business mindset. You know, business is business. Yes, there's a place for reasonableness and of course emotional intelligence because you're dealing with humans. You know, I don't believe in being transactional. Even though business, we're dealing with humans. So there's a place for fairness and reasonableness and all of that. But even then, business is business. And that is why structure has to be in place. Contracts have to be in place to protect you and to just guide the relationship overall. So the first thing is the subject matter of the contract. For some of us, the business that we offer is a service. So I'm in the service industry. Others of you, it may be a product, right? Whatever the subject matter of the contract is, that needs to be clearly defined, right? Why we're having this contract? What is it about? Very important. So the subject matter of the contract must be clearly defined. I am offering the service. What is the limit to the service? So in my case, let's say, for example, I'll come back to that because that's multifold. So I'll come back to that. So for now, subject matter of the contract must be clearly defined. Also, conditions. The conditions in the contract, are the conditions of satisfaction well established? Let us say we anticipate variations or delays. Does the contract account for that? And as it relates to delays, I have to highlight the situation that we're in now with COVID. You know, how do we deal with situations where the delays, the restrictions with COVID has impacted us meeting our contractual obligations. We're gonna get to that, right? But just so we know, that is something that has to be considered in the contract, even with the best intentions, going into the relationship, the agreement is for this thing to be completed within 90 days or 120 days. And from the execution of the contract, you have been meeting your timelines, but something happens. I mean, whether a particular product or good that you're waiting for, there's some delay with the shipping. Let us say there is some delay with the processing time of a particular matter. All of those things impact whether you're able to complete the contract within the time stipulated. So even though the contract will provide for a timeline within which it is to be completed, you still want to ensure that there are one or more provisions, depending on the circumstances of your case, that account for any delays or variations, right? So as it relates to money, all right, so obviously we're in business, so we have to talk about money, right? Money, 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 money. So whatever money will be exchanged, is a deposit required? What percentage of the overall price is required as deposits? Do you want to include that the deposit is non-refundable? And as business owners, we can appreciate why, depending on the circumstances, we would have a provision for the deposit to be non-refundable, right? So you want to consider that. You want to consider how will the deposit or any other payment made, how will that be treated if the contract is terminated before completion, right? These are things we have to look out for. So let me go over that again. Are the payment terms clear? Do you need a deposit to get started? What happens to the deposit if the agreement is terminated before completion? Very important. Another thing that's also important, the parties to the contract. Who am I contracting with? Who is John Brown? Where is John Brown located? Is John Brown a duly registered business or company? Very important. I know in Jamaica, the company's office, they are not in a position to really ensure that all businesses operating are registered. The compliance department is not so robust. Well, not as yet. Maybe over time, they'll become a bit more aggressive and robust about ensuring that businesses are registered. But whether or not they're there yet, you as a business owner, when you're preparing to contract, it's very important that the person you're contracting with has what we call legal standing. I mean, is this person registered? You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you sign a contract with an individual or business that is defunct or was never registered to begin with. And when it's time for you to get recourse, you're in problems. When a business is registered, that is one of the benefits, as a matter of fact, of registering a business. When it comes on to seeking legal redress, you're in a better position when the entity is registered. And we can even take it a step further. So we know that there's a difference between registering a business name versus registering a company. Company registration or incorporation is a proper term. There are a lot of what we call ongoing obligations when you register a company. So you entering into a contract with a company is very important that you're satisfied that this company, they're in good standing with the company's office, with TAJ, right? So that's in the event there's any need for legal redress, you're in a good position to see that. So very important. I'll go over that. Do you have the power to do everything you say you will do under the contract? In an agreement for sale of land, for example, do you have the power to deliver good title you have promised to the purchaser? So all that is saying is whatever you're promising to do under the contract is very important that you're in a position to do so. The next thing I want to highlight is third-party approvals. So depending on the business that you're in, you may need approval from third parties. So whether it's a parish council, whether it's the trade board, whether it's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There's so many dynamics at play in business. It's very important that we're not too quick to sign, so much so that we forget about all the possibilities. So if your business is such that a third-party approval is required, it's very important that the contract covers that. So it covers the need for that approval. It covers who is responsible to seek out that approval. And if there are any costs associated with seeking the approval, it's very important that it's clear who is going to pay. So whether it's one party or both parties will pay the costs associated with seeking the third-party approval. So again, are any third-party or government approvals or consents required? You need to consider that. Is it easier for one party to procure whichever approvals are necessary? Depending on the circumstances, you may be in a better position to do that versus the other party. Is it clear who will bear the responsibility and expense of procuring these approvals? Is it a situation in which the parties will have to work together to provide the necessary information? And if so, is it clearly stated? So let us say one party will be taking on the responsibility of seeking the approval, but even though they are the one who will be doing the submission, the follow-up and collection, it's very important that they get information from you, the other contracting party. And it's necessary then for you to comply. It's necessary for you to provide the information in a timely manner. All of those things have to be accounted for in the contract. So if it's a situation where I'm relying on information from you to submit an approval and you are tardy in providing me with that information, you cannot then complain about the contract not being completed on time. Or maybe a better way to say it is you can complain, but I will have as my defense the fact that you were tardy in providing the necessary information. You were tardy in providing the necessary information. So very important. I'm going to go over those 1, 2, 4 things I mentioned. Common pitfalls in business contracts that we all notice. I said we because I'm a business owner and I'm going to share with you a personal experience soon. Common pitfalls in business contracts that we must look out for. The subject matter of the contract, is it clearly defined? Are the conditions of satisfaction well established? How are variations and delays going to be treated? The next big one, money. Money. So many of these disputes always boil down to money. Are the payment terms clear? Is it that the payment will be made over the course of 3-6 months, or is it that full payment is required upfront? What happens to the deposits if the agreement is terminated before completion? We talk about ensuring that the parties to the contract, they're proper parties, they have legal standing. Do you have the power to do everything you say that you will do? Oftentimes, that is dependent on whether you're duly registered. Also, we spoke about third-party approvals, very important. In the event third-party approvals are needed, are any third-party approvals needed? You need to consider that. Is it easier for one party to procure the approval where necessary? And lastly, is it a situation in which the parties will have to work together to provide the necessary information? Very important, very important. So I'm going to share a personal experience before I open the floor. So recently, and when I say recently, I mean about 2-3 days ago, I found myself in a situation where I had to be reviewing a contract because, as I said, I'm in business. So, we have been exploring some options as we consider making some changes. So I was presented with a contract, and being the attorney that I am naturally, I'm going to read it in detail, line by line, everything. So I read it, and there were some clauses that I was very uncomfortable with, very uncomfortable with. So even me as an attorney, what I did, I have a senior attorney that I work very closely with. I call him senior counselor, sir, right away. the first thing that came to me is to send it to him to ask him to review. Remember, I'm an attorney. I could have relied on my own understanding, on my own skills, because I'm trained to review these sorts of documents. But even me, the attorney who is vetting contracts for clients, saw it fit to seek guidance, seek counsel from another attorney. I say that to say, and another thing I should note too, as I mentioned, that sometimes with contracts, we feel pressured. We feel pressured to sign a contract because, persons are very eager to get going. I know how we can be as business people. We're ready like yesterday. We have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But when it comes on to contracts, there's a lot to be said about being diligent, about being prudent. There's a difference between efficiency and haste. We know the popular saying, haste makes waste. This whole thing of hastily reviewing a contract, I am completely against it. And whenever I find myself in a position where I'm being rushed to review a contract, I get very annoyed. And can I say, oftentimes, when I find myself in a situation where I'm being rushed to review a contract, it always ends up that the transaction doesn't go through. I don't know. It's the strangest thing ever. It's the strangest thing ever. Every time, and I'm not exaggerating, every time, whether it's a client or me doing a business transaction for my own business, I find myself in a situation where these people are just in haste to sign and collect money. It always ends up that when I settle and review the contract, there are some serious issues. So it's either I find myself in a position having to raise the issues, or the transaction just doesn't go through because they drop out. So do not feel pressured, entrepreneurs. I know how it is, but do not feel pressured to sign a contract without having it properly vetted. There's a point I should have mentioned earlier, and I have it noted here, so I have to mention it. So I was listening to, some of us may be familiar with this program on RGR, I think. It's on one of the days when Orville Taylor comes on. So he has a segment with the Consumer Affairs Commission. So I was listening keenly one day, and the officer who was talking noted that a lot of business persons, in particular persons who are selling goods, we see it everywhere. No refund, no exchange. Okay. To be honest, from a personal standpoint, whenever I see signs like that, or if you tell me no refund, only exchange, that's not so bad. That's not so bad. But the signs, no refund, no exchange, immediately I'm a bit cautious. But in listening to this, the officer from the Consumer Affairs Commission noted that even though a lot of these business places have up these signs representing that, if you buy the goods and something is wrong with it, you cannot return it. It is not legal. There's a consumer affairs, there's an act that they're governed by. And the act makes it clear that notwithstanding that you go into a business place and you see the sign, no refund, there are circumstances under which the law requires that you get a refund. The only one I can remember right now is the good or the goods being fit for use. So if you bought it and it's not fit for use, legally, you are entitled to a refund. So I say that to say a lot of, or I shouldn't say a lot, but there are some terms in contracts that, even though they may look good and sound good, they are not enforceable. And for me, this is a perfect example of a term not being enforceable. So of course, as it relates to a store, when we go in, we're not signing any document or paper to say, I agree that no refund or exchange, but certainly those words, whether on the door or on the wall, it's effectively a contractual term, right? It is. So very important to ensure that whatever terms are in the contract are legal, right? So I want to touch on, yes, we have a question?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make a comment. I'm very happy you brought that up about the stores that would often say no refund and no exchange. It's one of those pain points that I've had over the years. And like you, if I go into a store and I see that as a sign, I am no longer interested in making a purchase from them, because I think it's called the right to redress. All consumers have a right to redress. So there must, if you make a purchase and something doesn't work based on the purchase, you have a right to get some form of something to say.
Right. Very important.
Yeah, it's very, very important. And also, there was the right to redress, but also for even businesses that are in business, you also act as a consumer from time to time.
Right.
Looking at the terms of what you're being offered as a consumer. That
Right.
is so very, very important. So I just wanted to say that. That's one of my pain points.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. All right. Let me just see. I'm seeing a comment in the chat. Let me just see if it's a question as I can address. All right. So we have Miss McLinch. All right. So certainly at the end, we're going to provide my contact details. All right. Great. All right. So there's something I want to touch on. Let me just see where we are with time. I think we're doing okay with time. So there's something I want to touch on because I know a lot of us are entrepreneurs. We may find ourselves in situations where we have intellectual property, right? We have some IP rights. So for some of us, if you're an author, it may be copyright. If you're into music production, copyright. For those of us who have these nice logos, it may be a trademark. I have to underscore the importance of, first of all, ensuring your trademark is registered, right? So that's number one. And in the case of copyright, to ensure that the work is indeed copyrighted, right? So we talk about properly documenting intellectual property arrangements. Again, I find that oftentimes as entrepreneurs, especially for those of us who are very, the creatives in particular, I find in my experience that creatives, generally speaking, don't tend to be good business persons. You can acquire the skills, but whereas the creative side comes naturally, I find that oftentimes as creatives, the business side, it's just not their thing. And because it's not their thing, they tend to be very casual about things that really require a business approach. And what we also find with a lot of creatives is that they really decide to start taking their work seriously when they have already been exploited, when they have already lost so much money. And, as we say that, I remember that gentleman that died recently, Diamond from the group. I was listening to, I think it was Beyond the Hill, a radio program, and they were talking about at the time, that particular group, at the time they were, doing their thing and doing very well in the business. It was at a time when this whole thing of copywriting your work, it really was not held in high regard, right? So because of that, there was a lot of exploitation and a lot of money was lost because their work was not protected. And not only that, because it was not protected, not only did they lose money, but you found that other persons were benefiting so much more from their money, from their work, right? So the people who have an idea of what it means or the value in copywriting your work were essentially exploiting them. So no, that can't happen. I mean, things have changed so much that every artist, they have their legal teams, right? So it's unlikely, it's highly unlikely that will happen now, but it's still important for us to, yes, we love what we do and we're doing it out of a genuine passion. But, it's still how we earn a living, right? Let's be real. That is what we use to put food on the table, to pay our bills, to take care of our family and our children. So as much as we love it and we're passionate about it, and as much as money may not be the first thing, it has to be a part of the conversation, bottom line. Right? All right. So yes, I see some activity in the chat. So let me just take some questions, some comments. All right, so very true. I'm seeing from Christina Thomas, there are so many creatives that are being taken advantage of in Jamaica. Yes, I wondered about the Mighty Diamonds. So many of their songs are popular and it appears only the record. Yes, very true. They were talking about it. They were talking about it extensively, I believe last week or the week before. And I'm seeing from JBDC, I found that it happens especially with artists of yesteryear. Definitely more and more artists are becoming more and more professional. So they have their publicists, they have their attorneys, they have all these professionals to really guide them to ensure that they're really earning from their skill, right? So I won't go into much detail because ultimately everything varies from person to person. So what applies to you may not apply to me. What's important is that we get the general principles, and what applies to you specifically that will come out in a one-on-one discussion. So just to reiterate, copyright, trademark, don't take for granted the value of your trademark. Don't take for granted the value of copyrighting your work. I heard, was this a few weeks ago again, another radio program, an individual he works with, I can't remember the name right now, but they are the entity that deals with paying royalties. So we know as it relates to music, for example, I heard them saying when Buju Banton was in jail, he was still earning because people were still singing his songs, playing his music, and you have to pay for that, right? So even though you find yourself in a situation where you cannot work for whatever reason, right? You're still able to earn because you have copyrighted your work, and don't take for granted how important that is. So the particular institution, a gentleman was speaking and he was saying he used to work there and he recalls writing checks for even $1 million. That's out of royalties alone, right? What could $1 million do for you and me today, right? So let us not be casual about it. Let us ensure that we protect our work. So I should also note that as it relates to copyright, there's an act. First of all, there's legislation that guides how we deal with copyright. Depending on the circumstances, you may license someone to use your work. You may assign your rights in a work. It all depends. What you want to do depends on your case. And when we have a one-on-one discussion, we can decide what is best for you. The crux of it is to ensure that you are protected. You don't want to be in a situation where someone is benefiting from your work. And if it's not protected through copyright or trademark, they can do so. There's a popular case, a Bob Marley case. They were so successful, if I remember correctly. There was a company that was benefiting from their goodwill. We all know Bob Marley is popular, not just in Jamaica, but all over the world, because they protected their work. They were able to bring that challenge and succeed. All right. So let's not take that for granted. I'm going to take a question before I go to the other point that I want to note in relation to contracts. I'm seeing a question here that says, what is the difference between a letter of intent and the MOU, that's memorandum of understanding? It depends. It depends. For me to properly advise on that, I definitely have to see the terms. I'll definitely have to have a better idea of what exactly context, as well as if the letter of intent and MOU, if you actually have it, I don't want to review to properly advise. So we can always talk about that after. Thank you for the question. Any other questions before I move on to contracts in the time of Corona? I want to touch on that a bit because I believe it's very important and very relevant today.
Yes, I have a question. Going back to the point of copyright, there is the issue of poor man's copyright. Does that still work? Is it effective, especially for our creatives?
When you say it's effective, what exactly do you mean?
I'm asking if poor man's copyright, if I'm a poet and I write popular poetry and so wants to use it. If I use the poor man copyright, am I protected?
Of course.
Right, that's what I wanted to find out, if it's still an
Certainly,
effective means of
certainly,
protecting our work.
certainly,
Okay,
certainly. Yes.
cool,
Yes,
thank you.
that. Any other questions on IP? That's intellectual property. All right, that sounds like it. All right, great. So let me just
Somebody was
touch on.
asking in the chat, what is poor man's copyright? So for those of you who don't know, I'll allow Miss Brydson to share that with you.
Sure. All right, can I come back to that?
Um,
Can I come back to the poor man's copyright?
Sure, no problem.
All right, so I'll come back to that after I touch on this COVID point. All right, so I'm sure, boy, the last 2 years, someone put it so well. The last 2 years have been random. The last 2 years have been a bit sort of random, you know, some very unexpected and strange times. And we find that it has not only affected our personal lives, family lives, but it has also affected contracts. It has affected our ability to honor our obligations. You know, it has impacted on the timeline within which contracts are to be completed. And the question is, I mean, what am I going to do? This contract is supposed to be completed in March and COVID is here. I cannot do anything. What to do, right? So, boy, it's not a clear answer. It's not black or white. What I can say, first of all, the fact that we're in such uncertain times, of course, things are getting better. The infection rate isn't so bad. The place, Jamaica and elsewhere, you know, businesses are opening up. Things are getting back to some semblance of normalcy. But even then, you know, we're still in some strange times. And when we consider also the war in Ukraine and that's impact on the supply chain, you know, it really does call into question contracts and ensuring that contracts are drafted, are coined in such a way to really cover as much as it can, right? A contract can do so much and no more, but it can do a lot. So as it relates to coronavirus, the first thing I will say is the fact that we're here, we're experiencing it right off the bat, we know. Whereas 5 years ago, we wouldn't think to include a clause that accounts for the delays and any other issues that arise as a result of COVID. That needs to be included. So even recently, last year, when I was drafting an agreement for sale, to my, I would say, pleasant surprise, the purchaser's attorney requested the inclusion of a clause to account for the delays that would be caused by coronavirus. And of course, I gladly accepted it. So right off the bat, what I can say is all contracts being drafted as of 2020 really need to have a clause that account for COVID and its impact on the performance of the contract. Right? There are two things in law. I won't get into too much detail because I don't want to confuse us, but just so we know, there are two doctrines in law. One of them is referred to as frustration, and the other one is force majeure, a Latin word, right? These are two doctrines that, depending on the circumstances of your case, they can be invoked to protect you in the event there are any delays with COVID. But what I will say, especially for frustration, the standard is high, right? So, and for that reason, the fact that the standard is so high, it's very, very, very important that we have a clause that speaks specifically to COVID. While you may be able to rely on frustration or force majeure, you don't want to find yourself in a situation where that's all you have to rely on, because it's not a guarantee that the court will allow you to rely on those two doctrines in the event you're unable to perform or complete the contract in line with its terms. So just so you know, just for information purposes, just to have an idea of what it means when we say frustration of a contract. it refers to being in a situation where it is impossible to perform the contract due to unforeseeable circumstances, all right? So I'm gonna say this again. A party may be permitted to cease performing a contract when it becomes impossible to perform due to some unforeseeable circumstances, right? And also, it's important to know that this doctrine comes into play when the contract in question does not have any clause that speaks to the circumstances that the parties to the contract are facing. High standard, right? High standard. So, and I stress high standard because the fact that there are delays as a result of COVID does not make a contract impossible to perform. So you don't want to have to rely on that, right? And then we have force majeure. If frustration does not apply, you have this option. You could still consider invoking this doctrine, which is usually a significant unforeseeable event outside of the party's control that prevents the party from performing the contract. That is more in our favor. Force majeure, definitely. We can all see how COVID would put an individual, depending on the circumstances of the case, put you in a position where you're unable to perform the contract due to a significant unforeseeable event. COVID is a significant unforeseeable event. We didn't see this coming. It literally came out of nowhere. So COVID-19 does give new meaning to the doctrine force majeure. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but we're working with that pronunciation for now, right? So just to say, I wanted to highlight these contracts in this time of Corona, just to say that, it's an important consideration. It's something that we have to. So whereas we were used to, proper parties, we used to the money part of it, ensuring that that is clear, ensuring that if there are any third party approvals, those things are standard, but certainly the business landscape has changed so much in the past few years that we find ourselves in a situation where we have to take into account the impact of COVID, and not just that, it forces us to consider, hey, there may be some other virus or some other thing that may not be COVID, but certainly affects life, affects business in the same way as COVID. So it forces us to really think beyond when we're drafting these contracts. Any questions? I'm wrapping up before I get into the official question segments. About how many minutes in am I? I have about 15 minutes.
You are well. You are doing very well with time. You can continue.
Okay, great. Any questions? Any concerns?
I just checked. It's force majeure.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds like the pronunciation.
Force majeure.
Not what I was saying. That is the pronunciation.
It's okay.
All right, going once. Going twice. Gone. All right.
Ineka, I'm sorry. There is a hand up. Tiffany.
Okay, I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. Why am I not sorry? You can go ahead. Yes, I'm hear a voice. Go ahead.
Okay, good morning.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. It really unraveled a lot of things for me. I just want to say I offer contract manufacturing, so I offer products along with other services. But one of the things for me is that I recently drafted a contract by myself, so I would love for an attorney to actually review it. But the thing is, in terms of stating prices in the contract, prices may fluctuate based on the price of raw material and so forth. How do I go about stating that in the contract to ensure that I don't set us like a standard price? Because of course, with the increase in in shipping and everything, it fluctuates so much that I'm not able to say, okay, 10 bars of soap will cost $5,000, for example. I'm not able to say that because it changes so rapidly since COVID. So how do I go about stating that?
Question, if you don't mind me asking, I'm seeing a reminder in the chat to address poor man's copyright. Yes, I'm going to come to that shortly. All right, if you don't mind me asking, the contract you're referring to, what is being provided? What sort of service or goods? Well, it's obviously.
Okay, so it's cosmetics, so natural hair and skincare products.
Okay, all right. Well, to be honest, the solution is pretty simple. It's simpler than you think, right?
Okay.
Certainly when it comes down to pricing, even as an attorney, you know, we structure contracts in such a way. Yes, we give a price, whether you're using a set price or a percentage, but you can include that the price is subject to change. There's a nice way of saying this price is not the final price or that it's subject to change. What's important is that it's there, because if it's not there, if you just give them a price, then you know, problems, you're not in a position to change it. So the important thing is whatever the price is now, because we only have control over now, right? Whatever the price is now, you quote that, and then you go further to say that you know, the price is change, and you know, there are different ways of saying it depending on what you want. All right, so it can be done. Not complicated.
Well, that's exactly what I had here, but of course I wanted the expert advice.
You're on the right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're on the right track. Is there another hand?
Beverly.
I'm going to the chats.
Beverly Smith has her hand up. So Beverly, I'm gonna unmute you and then you go ahead with your question. Go ahead, Beverly.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Loud and clear.
Okay, I just wanted to ask a question. It's a lovely presentation you have here. I just wanted to ask about a fixed contract. I'd signed one in the past and I had to go through a lot to get compensated for what they had, what you would call it. Well, I was not given a gratuity, and I had to go through a real long process to get it because I signed that contract.
You said
So I just wanted you to explain. Pardon me?
You said it's a fixed contract, a fixed term contract?
Fixed contract, right. And I was advised by somebody who is a professional and said I should never have signed it, a fixed contract.
Or can you give me an idea of what the contract was about, the nature, the subject matter?
It's employment, and it was a project.
Okay, so
that's basically that's all I could say about it.
All right, no, that's fine. No, I don't think experts to go into detail. So you were employed to an organization, and let's say they said employment would have lasted for 6 months, for argument's sake.
Right.
So it would have expired within. All right. So, you know, I'm glad you mentioned that, and let me tell you why. It's hard for me to give you advice without reviewing the contract. I mean, that's the first thing I would certainly do. I have to review the contract. And it really does touch on some of the points I made earlier. These fixed or sometimes what we call short-term contracts. As a matter of fact, I have an article on that before me. They are suspect. A lot of these fixed or short-term contracts, some of them, the clauses are illegal. Let's start there. The clauses are not legal. And for others, it's not that they're illegal, but they are grossly unfair. So the fact
very unfair.
The individual, you said someone had advised you that you should have never signed it.
Right.
Really the crux of it, and that is why when we get a contract that we're unsure about, or even if we're not unsure about it, we need to seek advice. And let me tell you why. At least I can recall recently at least 2 clients asking me to review a contract. And typically I'll ask clients, do you have any particular concerns
Mhm.
And in some instances, they will say to me, no, they don't have any concerns, they just want to ensure that they're protected. So I say that to say, there are times they get a contract, there are times you have concerns, and of course, you're going to express that to your attorney. But even in instances when you read the contract and you don't have any concerns, you need to ensure it is vetted to ensure that your rights are protected. So based on what you're saying, it sounds to me like the contract was drafted in such a way where it was just unfair, it was just unreasonable.
Right.
And because you signed it and executed it, it's not illegal, but it's unfair. You signed it, you really have no redress. So it's really a prime example of the importance of ensuring contracts are.
Okay. I have to go now, so you
That's
can unmute me. I mean, mute me. All right.
right. Right. So, yes, all right. So let me just answer poor man's copyrights because I don't want to forget. It's useful. So as we know, in business, everything costs. Everything is an expense. You want to register your business, you want to register your trademark, everything. The name of what are they, the Fair Trading Commission, everything is an expense. And there are persons who will find themselves in a situation where they're creative, they're gifted, they're skilled, and that gift, that skill has allowed them to produce a particular work, but they do not have the money, they don't have the capital to formalize it then, all right, to protect it. That's a better word, to protect it. So what the poor man's copyright is an individual mailing a copy of their work to themselves, right? So I have produced this book. I don't have the funds right now to have it copyrighted. The law does allow for you to do that. So what that does is, because when you mail it to yourself, and it's registered mail holds up in court. It holds up in your defense versus just handing in a document. Once it's registered, you registered or mail it to yourself, and you have the record, you have the slip from the post office. In the event you find yourself in a situation where someone is benefiting from your work, you have as your defense the fact that you mailed it to yourself, and that is proof that you own it. That is proof that you own it, right? So that is what poor man's copyright is. And it does hold up, it does hold up. Clear as mud. Make sense? I hope. Yes, no, maybe so. Let me see who asked. I'm not really good with names, but I'll try. That is Kenton Roberts. Are you clear what poor man's copyright is?
He will drop it in the, yes, he said it's clear, yeah, man.
All right, great. Fantastic. So there's something else I want to touch on. I think I touched on it earlier, but just to say it again, because I'm speaking to you not just as a professional, but a business owner. Certainly from my own experience, or as I see a question, so after I make this point, I'll take the question. We have to be careful. We really, nobody goes into business just for business sake. We're in business to make money. So I just want to encourage us to, it's a process. It's a process to take your emotions out of it. There is a place for your emotions because, again, we're not robots. We're human beings. We're dealing with people, whether it's your employees, whether it's your clients. But we have to be careful. We have to be careful to allow our emotions to get the best of us. And it is when our emotions get the best of us that we become very casual about contracts. I see far too many entrepreneurs entering into business arrangements either without a contract or with a very poorly drafted contract. And both are just as bad if you ask me. Right? So let me take the question. All right, question. What would you recommend for someone doing cosmetics? Should they do a patent or copyright? Which aspect should be specifically? Legalize. Copyright right off the bat. Not copyright, sorry, right off the bat, cosmetics. That sounds like more of a patent. Copyright speaks to works, so books, music. When you're talking about a product where there's a formula, that is more on the patent side. So certainly, patent. If it is that you produce, I don't know, some sort of manual or a guide that goes along with the product, and that guide, there's something special about it, something original about it, then you can copyright that. But the product itself has to be patented. And I must say, even with this question, as it relates to patenting a work and copywriting, there are very specific guidelines. So it's very important that you consult a legal professional to ensure that you can even patent the work. It's not just the fact that you make something doesn't mean you can patent it. There are some guidelines as to what can be patented. Even with copyright, the act speaks to the work, the law speaks to the work being original, and they go on to define and explain what is meant by original. So it's very important that you get the guidance, legal guidance, sound, not just legal guidance, but sound legal guidance as it relates to copyright and patenting. All right, so I hope I answered your question, Ms. Foster. You can let me know. All right, please spell the Latin phrase mentioned with frustration. That's Miss Gray, Paulette Gray. All right, so it is force, F-O-R-C-E. My keyword, I know I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but anyway, let me spell it. It's M-A-J-E-U-R-E. So that's force, F-O-R-C-E. M-A-J-E-U-R-E. All right, so I'm saying here, okay, thank you. And what should be the structure of a contract for someone making cosmetics for the business in regards to third-party non-disclosure? So again, hold on. Should the structure? All right, so as it relates to structure, that is that question, it's a very involved question, I would say. So it's going to be hard for me to detail that now. That definitely requires a one-on-one conversation. What I can say, as it relates to third-party non-disclosures, it is useful, it is wise to include in the contract a clause that speaks to non-disclosure. That's a very popular thing right now. So again, I mean, those things are standard, so you can always include a non-disclosure clause, or if it is that you want the non-disclosure to be a separate agreement, you decide what works best after you consult. I think I covered all the questions. All right, so just to wrap up, a lot can be said about contracts. It's a very involved topic. When we talk about every aspect of business, when we talk about entertainment law, sports law, it all comes, the foundation is contract. The foundation is contract law. What's important is that we understand the general principles. Specifics that will boil down to the nature of the business that you're in and what is required. So it wouldn't be wise to go into that now, because that would just be confusing and too much for us to retain. What is required based on your case, so for the individual who is in cosmetics, and the specific clauses you would want to include to account for the factors that affect your business will vary from someone like me who is in the service industry. So long as we understand that there must be proper parties to the contract, we must address the money aspect, that is payment terms, deposit. We must address the subject matter of the contract, ensuring that is clear. We must address third-party approvals if that is needed, how we go about procuring that, obtaining that, as well as the associated costs. We spoke about the need for the inclusion of a clause that addresses Corona, given the uncertain, unprecedented times that we're in. We spoke about intellectual property, very important, and I stress on that because far too many creatives take lightly the value of their work. So for those of us who are in that space, don't take for granted the importance of protecting your work and ensuring that you are in control as to how your work is used, right? Ensuring that there's no misuse, no abuse, and no exploitation. So with that said, it was great sharing with you, and I'm always here for this and to provide guidance if needed. Thank you once more.
Thank you so much, Ineka, for joining us this morning. I mean, I think what you have done here is to start a conversation that we might have to invite you back again.
No problem.
So to continue at some point, because I mean, it wasn't complicated information, but it was information that we would certainly need some follow-up on. I saw where somebody was asking in the chat, oh, Paulette, will there be a replay of this session? As we had intimated earlier, the session is going to be available on the JBDC YouTube channel. So you can check for it about Friday of this week. You should be able to access it. Ineka, I'm going to ask you please to remember to just put your information in the chat, because I get the feeling that you are going to get a couple of phone calls from this presentation, just to help some persons to, work their way through a couple of things. It was certainly an informative morning. I wanted to just ask you a few questions. Sure. And then you can go ahead and just share with us any final thoughts that you have. What I wanted to find out, I know that from time to time, some of our local attorneys would, allude to maybe a website or somewhere that business owners or even persons in general can go to find information to maybe like frequently asked questions. Are there any online resources that you can direct our audience to this morning in case they have a question and they don't know how to find you or they forgot about this session? Where would they be able to find some information online?
All right, so frequently asked questions as it relates to real property. So buying and selling land right off the bat, I would recommend the real estate board. They actually have a section on their website for frequently asked questions. So real estate board, anything related to property, any business you're doing regarding property questions and concerns, real estate board. As it relates to copyright, trademark, I'd also recommend JI. Is it JIPO? Right.
Jamaica Intellectual Property Office.
Right, yes, that's it. So on their website, they have frequently asked questions, as well as they have a lot of pamphlets that are in soft copy that can be downloaded. So even as it relates to the process for registration of a copyright and trademark, they provide very clear, good guidance on their websites. A lot of the major questions regarding those can be found on their websites. So that's JIPO, that's real estate board, even company's office. So again, as we progress as business owners, we find ourselves that we probably want to register a branch, or we want to have a group of companies, and that process can be a bit more involved than just say registering a business name. Company's office as well. They have frequently asked questions, as well as not frequently asked questions, but they have an information tab that summarizes the important things regarding registration of your business or registration of your company. Okay. I would also recommend, there are several. So 2 more come to mind. TAJ. I mean, if you really spend the time on TAJ's website, they answer a lot of questions. They have a lot of information regarding our tax obligations. That's pretty simple to read. And the last one I would suggest is Titles Office, National Land Agency. That's the agency that deals with everything related to registered land. They have a lot of useful information that's easy to read as well on their websites. So those are the ones that come to mind right off the bat.
I would want to add to it the Consumer Affairs Commission.
Right,
Because-
yes.
Because even though there are businesses, there are also consumers at some point, because
Right, yes.
how they're able to provide services is by purchasing.
Right.
And there was another one that I wanted to also recommend that I'm not recalling right now, so I'll just leave that alone.
So
J-
let's talk about JBDC.
Somebody asked about, how about JBDC? Well, JBDC, of course, provides broad information about business development. We are a from concept to market organization, meaning that from the day you come up with an idea, or even if you have the idea but you're not sure how to flesh it out, we're able to help you flesh it out as it
Right.
as it relates to, we would basically recommend you to most of those organizations that Ineka would have touched on, because
Right.
we consider ourselves as network brokers. So we provide you with the information,
Right.
capacity building, the institutional support so that you can develop the business in certain ways. But in terms of the law, as it were, we would not be able to provide legal information. Right.
But I must say, JBDC, these sessions over the years are very useful, extremely useful. So I encourage all entrepreneurs logged on to keep tuning in to get the information needed to really progress and scale as a business owner. Very good. Very
Thank you
good.
very much for saying that, Ineka, and I will just take a moment to do a shameless plug right here. We started these sessions in April of 2020. And to be very honest with you, this was right after the pandemic hit, and there was a lot of panic in the sector and persons really not really knowing where to turn. I think it was us that even came up with this word pivot.
Right. Oh, right.
We got so tired of pivoting, so till our CEO just said, we're moving from panic to passion. And I must say that the sessions have maintained, they have grown. There are times when we have so many persons online. And one thing I can say is that there has never been a Tuesday morning that we have had a session where we were panicking to say, oh, nobody not show up this morning. No, we have always had persons. And so, at this point, I just want to say thank you again to all the persons. I see some names in the chat, but they're not getting into the thing of calling names. But there are names in our participants list that I have become so familiar with because they are here every single Tuesday.
Right.
All right. So as we wrap up, Ineka, any final thoughts you want to share with us?
Yes. But my final thoughts, it's not in relation to contracts. My final thoughts are more encouragements. As I said, I'm gonna, the same thing I started the conversation with, I'm gonna end with, I am not just a professional, I'm a business owner. I understand every single emotion, frustration, every single high and the low that all of you are experiencing, have experienced, and will experience. And I just want to encourage you. I mean, it has been difficult for those of us who are still going despite COVID. Well done. It really has been difficult, but I want to encourage you from my own experience. Be diligent, be focused, be disciplined, really strive to create a business. And when I say create a business, put all efforts into creating real structure. So even this conversation about contracts, that's a part of the structure and framework that we need to ensure that we lay a solid foundation to build on so that we can scale. So don't take for granted these sessions, and don't be discouraged that even though there are times, we're doing what we're supposed to do and we're not seeing our way out. I can tell you from my own experience, if you keep at it, you really will see the light at the end of the tunnel. Just apply all that you're learning or all you have learned in this session, the sessions that have gone, and the sessions to come. So I believe my contact information is in the chat now.
Yes.
Yes, it's in the chat for all those who have been asking. Email address, number, address, office address, yes. And I'm here to help. So reach out and we can have a chat.
All right, thank you so much, Ineka. So once again, for persons who did not get an opportunity to join, please remember, you can share the link with them, tell them to go on youtube.com and search for JBDC Jamaica. And as you follow us on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the information that all the sessions that we have coming up, all the information that we will ever need to share with you, you can also access it on our social media pages. And of course, www.jbdc.net. And we are open 876-928-5161. It goes up to 5. And if you call that number, we can direct you to any of our offices across the island, because as you know,
Yes.
we're island wide. So thank you again, Ineka, for joining us. And thank you for sharing such valuable information. It was certainly appreciated. And I may just call you back for a part 2.
No problem.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.